does have the power.
She's wondering if that would choose not to respond.
Whatever that means. Choose people.
I should like to choose someone from France who I met who asked if they had if they could ask a question.
George, see you.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Shasha.
Shasha.
Yeah. So I have many questions. I have to pick one.
All right.
So I was wondering how you came up with the questions for your book, the vertical interrogation standards. We tried an exercise in class in Melissa, and we realized it was very hard to come up with these open-ended questions that are typically impossible to answer.
So Shasha is asking about my first book. It is a slightly boring first book, Jibz, called Vertical Interrogation Strangers. But at the same time, it is not boring. And very simply, just to be brief, I came up with it at the Air Turkmenistan counter in Heathrow Airport. We were taking my father's ashes to India on cut price post-Aeroflot airway. The flight was delayed, and you have to carry ashes around and talk to them. And there was a woman, she was Pakistani, and she was at the counter. She was an air hostess, and she had a very broad Glaswegian accent. And when I was a teenager, I used to pretend to be older than I am, and I would have something called the survey and stand outside Buckingham Palace. We should do a recap with Dynasty Handbag, and ask questions of people emerging from the barracks as a way to perpetuate a great longing that still hasn't been satisfied, quite frankly. So it just burst out to me. I pretended that I was writing a book, and I said I was interviewing or asking questions of women of Indian and Pakistani origin. So can I ask you something? She said yes, and the first question popped out at me, and it was, who is responsible for the suffering of your mother? And then she probably burst into tears, and but we passed, it was maybe 11-hour delay, Terminal 4 at that time. And that's how it began. And then I just kept inventing them and pretending that I was writing a book, and then I did.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could both talk about writing from being in your bodies, really deeply in your bodies, and then being able to comment on being there at the same time.
Well, I guess what I'm interested in right now is the sort of coming into the realization that this is it. You know, say it could be quite some time to get here, but it's like, this is it. You know, there's no, this is what I have to work with in all senses of, you know, mind, body, spirit, all that. And I'm about to turn 40, and that kind of thing never really used to matter to me because I was young. So, but not so much about like aging, but just about like slowly coming into the realization of like, dropping all the stories about what I think I need in my life and what is important to me, and you know, really, I wasn't really in my body when I was younger. I was very cut off from it. I was in my head about everything, and I didn't really have a relationship that was whole, and I'm working on that now. And not just for the physical body, but you know, like learning to be alone and like okay with that, and not like in total horror of how awful the person you are. Like saying one is, you know, or being with yourself and being responsible for what you put out into the universe, and there's no one else that's responsible for it but you. I should say, but myself. And also just the observation of the self-criticism is so, it's like profound when I really think about it, you know, like, wow, you really talk to yourself like that, you know, and I'm just acting as if, you know, like, what if I was like, you're wonderful, you're fabulous, you're just perfect all over, you know, like, what if I spoke to myself that way? That would be so great. But not, you know, but like in a real way, not like an affirmation way, like, you're a good person, people like you, you know, like that doesn't work. That's actually expectation that you're gonna fail. Because no one's gonna like you, like not everyone's gonna like you. Not you, me, no one's gonna like me. Not everyone's gonna like me, is what I need to say. So, I don't know, does that answer your question, sort of? Take it away.
Right then, hello Marissa Corral, who I've not seen for many years, and who just got a review in New York Times. Firstly, I'm looking at your face. Secondly, shame may be fatal. Number 3, what was your question? It's about like, is it the one about like the body and the middle of the body, and then remembering about the middle of the body?
Being able to write from really deep in your body, and then at the same time be able to comment on that.
Right. Okay. For me, that has been, I think, the reason why I think I had some big plan to initiate Meat Sack Protocol here, and to get in it, or to obtain the ox blood and lean over the table. And create a tableau to create an indelible image for all of you. But as I said, began to be worried knowing Jibz's work and having my own dream of a guest starring on the Mindy Project on the side note, TV work.
There's
That's very true, but I was thinking of like maybe guest starring as her aunt, who recently relocated from...
Things are getting really progressive now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Absolutely. So, back to your question, Marissa. I think it is about what happened in the meat sack, which is to say, I got in one on a butcher's table, and finding it quite difficult to write through the body, and then just having another parallel practice as a with the body in another part of life. So I'm a professor, but I'm also a massage therapist. So that takes up a great part of this other part of life that never makes it into the other place. So I began to work through movement practices and thinking that I didn't want to recreate the scene, but I wanted to make a scene that was compounded and find a way to track the nervous system from the very middle of it. So lots of that gets into my writing and helps me to write books, but it doesn't help now. It doesn't help here. It's of very little use here because there's no place for performance after having written a bloody book. Does that make sense? Performance for me, a movement practice, and the sensory motor sequence, which is to say, find the place that glitches in a sentence as in life. I'm a fiction writer, not really. So I work through the scene, not really. So I find the place that glitches there, and then I work through architecture just to stage it a bit. But it's not a very effective or well-documented way of behaving. But that is my answer. It's in 4 parts. And I'm scared to pass the mic to Jibz now, who terrifies me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with clowning?
Ew.
Both talk about it.
I'm a clown. I'm a lady clown. My relationship to clowning. Well, I mean, it's like mimery or miming. You know, it's just got a bad name, but it's actually the practice of it. Whatever. I'm not even talk. I was like talking my ass. Like, well, traditionally the clown. But I don't have one. Yeah, I don't know. I did take some clowning classes as a child.
Okay, in relation to you having said that you were in the MOMA previously. How about that? My question to you is two parts.
Okay, no, I got something for you. Oh wait, you're still going?
No.
Okay. Well, the clown's motives are always, you know, really, there's no emotional complexity to a clown, right? Like, everything's on the surface. And the laughter comes from watching the clown try to be cunning, be wily. They're not sexual, they're like over-sexualized, so they're not sexual. There's no mystery, there's no, they're just like a display of our emotional plane, I think. That's what I understand it is to be. So it's disgusting and horrible to watch. But I do have a relationship to that, I think, in my work, because a lot of times I didn't do a very good job explaining what it actually looks like when it's staged, which is the snakes and the stomach. Everything is an animation that I'm interacting with, and then I either am talking or there's a narration that's I'm fake talking with, like, and then the voices, or yeah. Anyway. So you're seeing the insides on the outside. I guess that, right? Like the psyche is really on display, I guess, in an almost embarrassing way for me, myself and others. Is that kind of what you mean? But we don't have a relationship. But I did go to a circus camp. Performing arts camp, there was some clowning there. I do know how to make a hat. Wait, does someone have a hat? You motherfuckers have a hat? Name that. Toss it over here. I do know how to do this. I'm so full of shit. I totally have a relationship to clowning. Oh. Oh. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes? Oh,
I have a question with sort of both of you, and I have to say I'm here because I thought, what great curating. I really have to give it to Ariel, because I thought putting the two of you together is so interesting. Starting the season this way with the two of you was like, what a message, you know? So it's great.
Yeah.
But I think it's what were you saying?
I said, yeah, fuck it.
That's my answer. No, but I guess I wanted to say that so I didn't want to make like a comparison thinking about the two of you working, but I thought, why is it so great the two of you together? And I think there's something very unraveling about both of you as you read and perform and talk your work. I feel like you're you're changing all the time. You know, like if you're doing something, you're talking to yourselves. There's a lot of inside, outside. You know, it's very processy and very different. But it's like, you know, there's many voices and there's many different positions in the same. You know, they're not uniform works at all. And I thought, as a female artist, I feel like one of the things, women are always asked in a way to be one thing. You're kind of like always kind of up against this perception that if you do anything in a chaotic way, you're just being female, you know? And I think women are kind of asked to be very artificially intact, you know, because we're supposed to be so not intact in a way. And I feel like both of you take that on directly in this way and seem not at all trying to do a false facade, but are really kind of like open with the changeability of work. And so I guess I wanted to ask you both if, I mean, I don't mean, how do you get to be like that? But I wonder, are there a few stations, are there a handful of stations, like in your own individual process of getting to here as the artist you are now, like where were you that you got here? You know, like what were the couple of things you were and you weren't that wound up making this be the thing that works? Because you both work so well as what you're doing. And it seems like it must have been really interesting, the places you were before you were here.
Firstly, how do I leave? Maybe I can respond to this idea about chaos and femininity, or the woman's body. And for me, it denotes a kind of asexuality for me, meaning I am beyond the barrier reef situation from my home culture. I'm about to go to India and I'm just preparing myself for the remarks. Your teeth are so yellow, you have become so fat. I know a wonderful 89-year-old man who will be very interested. He was a dentist in Hounslow before relocating to Sector 9, and perhaps we can set up a meeting. Thank you so much, Auntie Amrit. The last time I was in that situation, I was vomiting in a back room in New Delhi. I was going to get on that air Turkmenistan flight at 3 a.m. and just force some neighbor to drive me on his scooter to the doctor, like, inject me now, I have to get out of this place. So part of it is it's much too late. And you know, when you said, where were you? There I was walking home from school with a bit of liver in my pocket, meaning I'd gone to my first autopsy, my first dissection. I was briefly enrolled in the London Hospital Medical School. So there I was, and trying to prove how tough I was. I think one of the questions from my first book, and I'm so sorry I was a bit rude to the young woman who asked and made a joke about it being boring to have that book, but I apologise for that back then, France. So one of the questions in that book was, tell me what you know about dismemberment. So I was always trying to prove, yeah, I can be a doctor. Like here, I'm carrying home some part of a carcass from my studio event with the body. So I was there, which is to say I was in England, and then I was in India, but the world doesn't work like that anymore. Like coming from there to here, it's now, we're in the world of the reloop, we're in the world of people more interested in going to Sweden and Denmark than they ever would be to come to the US or Brazil, do you know what I mean? And people move more fluidly back and forth. So there is a feeling for me of it being much too late to be marriageable in a certain way, or to go back in another way. Although the endocrine system knows differently, you get off the aeroplane, and whether that's in Calcutta or like the dingy industrial suburbs of northwest London, and your body floods with desire and homecoming to be there, for that is your very home. So I'm a little bit caught, but I'm going to try and figure it out in India, you know, forthcoming in about a week and a half. I have to do a performance, and it's in memoriam of Nirbhaya, the fearless one, the girl who was raped and thrown off that bus there in 2012. So what I really need is advice. How do you do that? How do you make that inexorable pilgrimage covered in soot or ash or the red powder of that place, which is a protected position as a woman? You can be a sacred wanderer, so you're in disguise. And what does it mean to be witnessed when you lie down on the ground where she lay for 40 minutes before anyone called the police? So So that is my big idea, to see if I can tolerate, the boundaries of my own body and, work through discharge as much through other means. So those are some notes about being a woman.
Hi, Helene. I guess listening to Bhanu speaking about that was making me feel like I guess I think about the way that my mind used to work in seeing the world, and in like a very fearful way. So when I would make work, it was very controlled and very calculated in this way of like, yes, it was like wild and crazy and blah 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 blah, because I'm really a physical performer, and so I can really like emote like crazy shit and theatrical and stuff. But I wanted to keep a very tight rein on the content, and I didn't really. I was like letting people into my psyche a little bit, but it was. So much of it was about just trying to actually, how do you make something? How do you make a piece of work? Like work, I really didn't know how to do that, so my work started out as work talking about how to make work. And now I feel like I've done a lot of weird stuff, and my life like went in a lot of weird directions, and it's not fitting any mold. I mean, similarly only in the way that I feel like what you were speaking about, like geographical and sort of cultural, and that's in every single person, just on a smaller scale. Sometimes there are differences, and yeah, I mean, it's pretty evident that I'm not gonna go a certain way in my life, and I think I did kind of fight that a lot for a long time. Or I had an expectation like, when you really get it together, it's gonna look like this, or like, once this thing happens, you're gonna be all a certain way, or whatever. And it's just not happening that way. And I do find that when I listen to artists that I like, or read artists that I like, or the more they show me about the human experience, which is specific to them, obviously, and I think it's also a way to combat all of the isms that we have in society, is that if we were listening to everyone's story, really listening to the complexity of everyone's stories, we would live in a more peaceful and just society. And so, I guess what I'm saying up here from my high chair is that, I want to be as transparent as I can be about all my shit, and that means like the joy stuff, and like joy and pain, and fashion, and hamburgers, and suicide, and sex, and all those things that make up a life, history, desire. I want to know everything about what people are into, and so I feel like I want to do that too, even though it's really terrifying to do it. But I would hope that I can't do it, but I can try to do as much of it as I can. I think you, of all people, understand that drive, especially hamburgers, and the sex part.
Okay, last question.
It's all you, better be good.
There's a quote by but now lost my writing somewhere over there. The purpose of avant-garde writing for a person of colour is to prove you are human. So maybe not to speak for Nobese, who was giving a lecture about her work song, but you can listen to the archived lecture, and you just type in like summer writing program, Naropa, and maybe that quote itself, and that will appear. But hearing it, it was just scrawled in my friend, oh, this is MG Robertson's dress actually, she gave me, taking matters into her own hand. And I showed up in San Francisco in jumpsuit. Very cute. She's like, no, take it off immediately. I have Banana Republic's silky dress. Which is to say, all of that happened at a conference called From Trauma to Catharsis. Notes on the Asian avant-garde of which I am a member. And MG Roberts too. So it came from that. I think it was about like sitting next to someone who was scrawling it down. And so underlying that are questions of affinity, proximity, and when someone says something that pierces that great numbness that one walks around with almost all the time. Now I'm going to, this is my moment to quote Willa Kappa.
Do it, girl, do it.
I have crossed so many rivers, I have become numb to them. So, there we go. How to stop being quite so numb and begin to live without being quite so afraid all the time.
Let's hear it one more time. Thank you all.